I wanted to just spend about 10-15 minutes talking through a couple of the more innovative approaches we're seeing today across the globe in terms of how governments implement economic, social, and fiscal change. I think the starting point is there is so much diversity of opinion out there today in terms of what is the right approach. I am not advocating one particular approach to be the way to go forward. This is just a approach that McKinsey has used in multiple countries across the globe, in about 50 different countries actually, and where we've seen real success. So let me talk through that in some detail, and I'm happy to take questions. Before I get started, what we see is when we look across different countries, there are a common set of challenges that are faced in terms of implementing economic, social, and fiscal change. Leadership at all levels, whether it be at the top of the government, at the civil service level, at line ministry level. It's that capacity to actually manage and implement change. Stakeholders. I don't think I need to talk too much about stakeholders, but you've got entrenched, powerful stakeholders, in many cases with competing needs, and in some very unfortunate cases, competing needs that are actually going against the good of the country. Silos, federal versus local, different needs, different objectives, in many cases competing. The civil service, there is in many cases a level of inertia that you see in the civil service towards movement, towards action. There can be a lack of motivation, there can be a lack of speed. And I'll talk about this in greater detail when we get into some of the processes. But in many cases, civil services are geared to think about policy. And what we are now asking them to do is move away from policy and start thinking about implementation and actually delivering. And that requires some level of support and some level of upskilling to enable them. Just generally the lack of delivery capability. Do you actually understand what it takes to deliver change quickly? Not in a 10-year plan, not in a 15-year plan, but within 6 months, within 12 months, at best within 24 months. And then just the mindset of thinking about how you actually implement all of these changes. What you see up there at the moment is a 10-step approach. If you take any one of these individual buckets, it's kind of, it's a bit of a no-brainer, right? I don't think anybody's going to argue with me that each of these need to happen for us to have successful implementation, successful delivery. The innovation here is actually combining these in a sequence. So let me walk through these, and I'll talk through a little bit of examples of where we've seen real innovation across these buckets. So prioritization and outcomes. No government in the world has been successful in delivering real change if it is unable to prioritize. And this is as much what you choose not to do as it is what you choose to do. If I take us back to the challenges, entrenched stakeholders, federal versus local, you've got competing needs, you must prioritize. Labs. Labs is a complex way of describing what I like to call as 3-feet plans. Most often, we like to think of 30,000-foot planning, big ideas. Very few times do people actually go to the trouble of saying, what does that mean at the 3,000-foot level, 300-foot level, and actually, have I got something down to the level of granularity I can give you, and you can literally take that and implement it. An example of this is where we've seen in a South Asian economy, or East Asian economy actually, all the stakeholders brought together for a 6-week program to help reduce street crime. And this is a wide set of stakeholders from the government side, any kind of private sector involvement that was required. The plans they came up with were at this level of granularity. There are 13,282 policemen in the city. We have 18,000 hotspots of crime. When I narrow that down, when I really get to where there is real 80% of that crime across those hotspots are concentrated in 100. Focus that further, and actually identify 15 hotspots where if I concentrate my police force, I get the maximum amount of impact. Then, here are the different policemen or women, and here's who's going to be assigned to each place. Here's what time they're going to be assigned. Here's what they're going to be doing. That is 3 feet planning, and that is the level of granularity you want to be at to actually make change happen. Because there is no argument beyond that point. Here it is. Here is your plan. Go ahead and implement it. And you've got the backing behind it. Next comes the budget. Any plan without a budget is a draft, right? So you need the finance ministry to be engaged. You need an active budget to be assigned. The priorities you set are where your budget needs to be allocated. This does not mean you don't allocate budget to other important activities that the government is engaged in, but as the word suggests, priorities means you get more budget, more time. Public feedback. The time that we think that governments know best is gone. We must get public feedback. And there are various different forums. Real-time feedback through social media. Again, another East Asian economy, there was a very interesting piece where after the labs and after all the budgets were set, a huge conference was called. I think around 1,000 people attended. And the quote I remember the best was, the leader of the opposition came, went through all of the plans, and then went to the press and said, this is what I said they should have done a year ago. So literally getting that level of buy-in, even from the opposition. Roadmaps. You need a clear plan of what you're going to do, and you want to communicate that. You want to get pregnant with what the plan is. Essentially, once you've communicated what you're going to do, and you've laid out the roadmap, as I say, government is pregnant, you can't go back on that. Delivery units. This is essentially a mechanism that supports all of the other elements. Does the quantitative analytics around what your priorities are, thinks about how the line ministries can be supported, and then starts to think about performance management, which is the next step. Performance management. Malaysia is a really good example here, where in their 6-year plan, on a quarterly basis, different members of the government would have to actually go to the Prime Minister and have sessions where they actually reported back on their performance, and they were managed accordingly. Capacity building. You want to think about, across these steps, how do I enable the people that are involved to better deliver? And then communicating impact. Let me come back to that. 10 is institutionalizing delivery. When you start, this delivery is for big ideas, right? It may be how you improve education in a country. It may be how you take tourism levels to another level, to the next level. But actually what you want to do is institutionalize this approach, that you actually think about this as how you deliver everything. You go through these steps, and you're not going to be rigid about it. You will be fluid, but these are 10 steps that you want to be thinking about all the time. Why I held up back on communications is none of this matters if you do not communicate. Right? Often we see governments actually achieving a lot, working in the background, changing policy, changing fiscal positions, but they fail to communicate what they're doing to their stakeholders and to the wider public. And when they do communicate successfully, this is the kind of change you can see. Within 6 months. I'm not going to go through all of this, but let me just talk about what's achievable after 12 months, because I think some of these things are truly inspirational. 1.5 million children more in education within 12 months in Pakistan. 200,000 jobs created in Morocco. 500% increase in tax revenue, nothing to do with oil. Really material change that can change the outlook of a country. And if you look at the countries on the right-hand side, purposely stayed away from the UK there, but if you look at the top 3, similar positions to Sri Lanka, and have made real change. So, coming back to communications. If I leave you with one thing today, achieving impact is only really meaningful if you can communicate that change and get into a virtuous loop of change, communicated, understood, leading to more change. So it can be through annual reports, it can be through getting independent bodies to verify the change that's going on. In certain cases, auditors are brought in to audit actual results and independently validate. But most importantly, we need to move away from the more common approaches to actually start thinking about, how do we display our successes? How do we engage citizens to deliver that change? Whether it's social media, whether it be as apps of some sort. How do you measure and communicate perception? Leverage online and social media, and just really get a culture of embracing change. So this is a little bit about what we've seen outside. What does this actually mean for Sri Lanka? Prioritize. It is very important that a small subset of priorities are what you focus on to actually achieve change. Quick wins. As a consultant, we always advocate quick wins because a quick win actually gives you momentum to go after some of the harder things. But in programs of large-scale economic and social change, it is dangerous to only focus on quick wins. You must start thinking about a more balanced approach. Of course, go for the quick wins. Gives you the momentum. But have a more balanced approach that also thinks about the large-scale changes that need to take place. Lead by example. This needs no explanation there. Number 5, regular engagement with the public. And again, start thinking about how you engage at different levels, how you engage in the cities, how you engage in a more rural context, and have a more granular engagement plan. Remember the people element. And the last one I think is quite interesting, which is something that you mostly think about in IT, right? Trial and error, the agile approach of developing something. But increasingly, by using methods such as labs, you can actually do trial and error in terms of policy, in terms of implementation. You come up with a set of ideas, you bring it into the lab, you test it, it's no good, turn it around. I've actually seen particular approaches for tourism actually, where 6 different approaches were tried within 1 week before coming to something that actually led to what was then taken on for the next 5 weeks of the lab and detailed out further to get to like 3-feet plans. That's all I wanted to actually touch on in terms of the presentation. But as I said, if I leave you with a few parting comments as the clock winds down. Think about the priorities. What is it that is most important, and what is it that you're not going to do? Think about the capabilities. Do you have the right leadership in place? If not, how do I get it? It doesn't have to be from within. It can come from outside. It can come from the private sector. It can come from the diaspora. There are many options. Communicate. Make sure that your plan is understood, your roadmap is understood, and your results are clear. Thank you.